Hello everyone, this is Louise LoBello speaking, and I'll be sharing with you all a brief overview of the monograph that Marika, Labash, and I read for this week, entitled The Birth of the Museum, History, Theory, Politics, written by Tony Bennett. And just some background on the author before we dive into the text. Tony Bennett is an English scholar who has worked as a professor in both the UK as well as in Australia. His academic interests include sociology, cultural theory, literary theory, museum studies, and the interplay between all these disciplines, especially with power structures in society, highly influenced by the ideas of Michel Foucault. This book, The Birth of the Museum, was published in 1995, and it is his third published book out of a total of over 10 books that he currently has published, in addition to a long list of other articles and publications. So, The Birth of the Museum was the result of compiling several papers and articles, so the content is quite dense and contains enough case studies to have a 3-hour presentation, but in an attempt to keep this quite brief, I'm going to divide the presentation up by the 3 main parts of the book. And part 1 is entitled History and Theory, part 2, Policies and Politics, and part 3, Technologies of Progress. So starting with part 1, the first part of the book, appropriately named History and Theory, and consisting of 3 main chapters: the formation of the museum, exhibitionary complex, and political rationality. It outlines the courses taken in the development of the museum system during the 19th century to produce a sort of model citizen, initially intending to inspire the public to contemplate science, art, and culture. This performative action of museums, as Bennett explains, intended to result in a self-reflexive kind of space that encouraged citizens to consider their own responsibility in maintaining social order. In addition, ethnographic displays depicting a sliding scale hierarchy of primitive to civilized societies also work to influence citizens to reevaluate their role in this sliding scale of society. Additionally, Bennett uses the example of James Silk Buckingham's model design for the town of Victoria in the mid-1800s. It is complete with open spaces and a system of colonnades for constant citizen transparency, to show how the same concept for social reform was applied beyond the confines of just museums and libraries to the general layout of public spaces. The last half of the section focuses on the educational role taken on by museums by means of the state through both hard and soft approaches of systematic pedagogical implementations, as well as more subversive acts of entertainment and pleasure. And this picture to the right, to the left, is a representation of plans for a model town of Victoria, and each of these squares that are located within one another would include lookout points. They are colonnades for members of society to watch each other, all the while policing their actions and policing their own actions subsequently. The second part of the book, Policies and Politics, is broken down into the chapters Museums and the People, Out of Which Past, and Art and Theory, the Politics of the Invisible. Here Bennett addresses how the modern museum's political rationality has transformed since 19th century museums as described in part 1, as 19th century museums tended to display objects reflecting various cultures. It did not reflect the lives and times of those who actually visited these spaces, primarily referring to working class people as well as certain minority groups. Bennett describes the growth of open-air museums during the 19th century as an attempt to fulfill this demand for presentations of daily local life. However, as seen in his example in discussions of Beamish in North England, which is a living history village, social politics were often left out of the displays, and he criticizes it for tending to only show surface-level observations of daily life. And we see this in this photo to the left, which is a reenactor of the Beamish Open Air Museum, displaying aspects of 19th century English life, but it neglects to discuss more politicized aspects of society, such as the role this woman held in society during the times, and the role of women overall during the period. This section also touches upon the way that theoretical ties and expectations implemented in museums make it less accessible sometimes. The public art gallery is an example of this, and how a basic understanding of art theory is necessary to properly analyze the works of art hanging on the walls, and thereby limits the accessibility of the institution to the whole of the public. In the final part of the book, Technologies of Progress, it contains the chapters Museums and Progress, Narrative Ideology Performance, The Shaping of Things to Come, Expo 88, and 1001 Troubles, Blackpool Pleasure Beach. It's in this final section that Bennett reconsiders museums, fairs, and exhibitions as technologies of progress, machines for pushing culture forward. He discusses how the 19th century museum was the first to compress time and reveal artifacts and displays in such a way that allowed visitors to move forward through time and the development of contemporary civilization. These progressive displays were related to contemporary theories on evolution as well as social Darwinism. The same type of evolutionary display is reflected in the architectural layout of country pavilions at the 19th century World Expositions, exposing middle-class Americans for the first time to the lives and manufactures of foreign peoples, and encouraging a reflection of their own role in world society. Bennett ends the book with a discussion on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, an European amusement park, and how even carnival-like environments can be analyzed as a museum and a conduit of technological progress. The photo shown on the left is a photo of the White City at the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Not pictured are the displays from the Midway, which was an area of the fair considered to be the most entertaining by fairgoers, and it featured pavilions of foreign, mainly non-Western cultures and countries, whereas this area shown in the picture, the White City, presented displays of fine art and manufactures by cultures considered to be more quote-unquote culturally evolved. And this is enhanced by the architecture of the buildings, the classic Greek columns, and just the white, pure color of the whole event. And overall, The Birth of the Museum has been a very well-received book, and it is now often used as an introductory work in museum and cultural studies. Since its publication, The Birth of the Museum has been reviewed in a variety of journals ranging from library focus to history design, and sociology journals, as this monograph is quite multidisciplinary. The reviews, produced within the first year or two of the book's publication, are generally quite positive, with some consistent critiques that reflect some of our own critical assessments that we had. We looked at 3 reviews in particular, and they all reflected similar feelings that we had while reading the book. That is, that the book had a stimulating account of the development of museums, focusing on both politics and pleasure, but at times it is disjointed and choppily formed. Due to the way this work was assembled, as we know, by combining a series of articles, it is not surprising that certain areas seem to be a bit out of place, particularly in the last chapter, Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which almost seems tacked on and doesn't really conclude the book as nicely as we would have wished. We hope you've enjoyed learning about some of the history and development of museums as much as we have. And now, if you'll join us in the classes forum, Marika and I have created a few discussion questions to spark a conversation.